This is Shazla Tau Kais. By all accounts, he should be a nobody, a low-ranking Tau of the Fire Warrior caste that would be expected to perish in one of his first few engagements. But in 24 hours, this small fishman committed atrocities one can only imagine. Kai's rap sheet is long. He took out a sizable chunk of the Raptor chapter of Space Marines, destroyed so many Chaos Wordbearers it makes the Battle of Kalth blush, and snuffed out so many human lives it's not even worth keeping track of. But perhaps his most impressive feats are, well, let's let the footage do the talking. What you just witnessed was Kais destroying a Demon Prince. An act so impossible, it usually requires an army and a literal miracle. But Kais did it on his first day on the job. Twice. But the biggest tragedy isn't the lives Kai took here. It's that Kai's actions are experienced through a game that is so unfun, buggy, and boring that it not only led to a on Metacritic, but sealed the fate for both the Tau and first-person shooters in the Warhammer universe. With Tau Fire Warrior recently being re-released on Steam, I subjected myself to playing through the entire game, slugging through combat that felt quite similar to a 3 AM melatonin-induced fever dream. What I found was an experience that puts the last 2 decades of Warhammer 40,000's game development into clear context. This isn't just a video about game bad, this is the tragedy of how Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior ruined everything.
A cancer, Admiral. A tumor to be removed.
In 2003, the gaming world was still recovering from the majesty that was Halo Combat Evolved, a game that was so influential and cool that it still has men in their 20s writing video essays about it. Does Halo Combat Evolved still hold up, or... And because of Halo's insane success, everyone wanted their own piece of the pie. This era spawned the infamous Halo killers. Now, many of these games didn't explicitly use that term. Hell, some of them actively spoke out against it in fear of under-delivering. But that didn't stop a concentrated push of new shooters with Halo-esque mechanics, gameplay, and vibes. Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior was one of these games, and it makes sense. The Warhammer universe seems like a no-brainer for a first-person shooter setting, and before Fire Warrior, there was only one FPS set in it, and even that is only technically an FPS. Now, on top of being debatably the first Warhammer FPS, it's crucial to understand the other big reason why Fire Warrior was so important. See, until recently, Games Workshop, the creators of the Warhammer 40k IP, made most of their money on overpriced little plastic men. The books, the games, and the entire universe were all created to plant psychic worms into your brain to convince you to purchase, build, paint, and play with little plastic men.
What in the actual f*** are you guys doing?
So Fire Warrior is best understood as an ad for what at the time was the brand new faction of, you guessed it, little plastic men. The Tau. The Tau's release was interesting because they were sold as a new high-tech faction focused on facts and logic. On the lore side, they were designed as a philosophical foil to the Imperium of Man, whose superstitions lead them to do things like pray to their ovens so their chicken tendies don't get burned. On the tabletop, the Tau stood out because their unique aesthetic was inspired by anime and mecha design like Gundam. And the Tau really did add a new feel to the Warhammer world. But if you've played any Warhammer games or read any Warhammer books or watched any Warhammer animations, you'd probably say, wait, when do these guys actually show up? And the answer is, rarely, if not ever. And I think that this game is more than partly to blame for that. But we'll get there. Before we get into the game itself, we need to quickly talk about the marketing, because it was unhinged. What the fuck? This wasn't necessarily unique for the time.
Die, Katana. John Romero's about to make you his
but it's a far shot from how Warhammer is advertised nowadays. Like, we have this ad, which seemingly the PS2 itself is telling me I'm going to cream my pants. And, never mind. We don't have time for Tau Jesus. Let's move on. Tau Fire Warrior starts the game with you in a dropship, playing as Shazla Tau Kais. This is Kais' first day on the job, so it's a big deal for him. And, someone is saying something to me. I think it's important. I genuinely cannot tell because I can't hear him.
Your training has prepared you for conflict, but this battle is the true test of whether you are a Tau warrior of the fire caste.
Yeah, this game has a sound problem. The audio quality is just so compressed and low fidelity, it's genuinely baffling. But you know what? Who cares what that dude on the ship said, right? This is a shooter. We don't need to hear. Let's just get out there and have some fun.
No. Oh no. Why? Why does the mouse feel like this?
The best way I can describe it is it feels like I'm using my mouse as an analog stick. Everything is this sluggish drag. Looking up is way harder than looking left or right. Like the game is actively fighting me for control of the camera. And you may say, oh, it's probably just mouse acceleration. Just turn that off in the... Oh. There's no options here. Huh, I mean, that's strange. This is usually where the options live. Well, on the Steam version, you can alternatively launch this, which, ta-da, has a few options. You can rebind keys, change your sensitivity, graphics, and looks like that's pretty much it. No mouse acceleration. So we can't hear and we can barely look around, but surely the guns will save this experience, because this is the Tau we're talking about. On the tabletop, these guys are feared for their long-range firepower that shreds entire units before they can even get in range. In the lore, their pulse rifles are superior to the lame laser weapons the Imperium uses. Fancy gyroscopes built into the barrel for accuracy at insane distances, enough penetrating power to punch through 300 meters of brick, and...
Incoming message.
Guys, the dropship has been destroyed.
There's a lot of problems with the weapons in Fire Warrior, but most egregiously, they miss. Even when your reticule is on the enemy, and it's red. The weapons in Fire Warrior are almost universally inaccurate, weak, depressing pea shooters that rely entirely on the auto-aim to be functional at all. You know in Halo when you pick up the Magnum and it just feels right? Every headshot is crispy, every kill feels satisfying. Fire Warrior's guns feel like the opposite of that. One of the game's only saving grace weapons is the bolter, which blows guys up, and that's pretty much the only requirement to get the bolter right. But eventually in the late game, the enemy's health scales so high, people stop blowing up, so even the bolter loses its appeal. Which brings us to the enemies. The world of Warhammer 40,000 has a lot of really cool stuff to potentially throw at you as enemies, and from the Tau's perspective, going to war with both the Imperium and Chaos, you know there's some real juicy choices here. But what we get are just guys with guns, who die in an incredibly dramatic pose. That's the entire enemy design philosophy. Slightly different weapon, slightly more or less health, same exact strategy every time. Walk forward, press M1. Watch them do their drawn-out Shakespearean death. I will say that I played on normal because the game locked out hard mode until you did, and I was absolutely not playing this trash fire twice. But Fire Warrior has essentially zero challenge. Not once in this entire game did I have to rethink my approach. Walk forward, M1. Walk forward, M1. Walk forward, M1. I remember the disappointment I felt when first fighting a Space Marine. When you get the bolter for the first time, you head through some vents and end up in this room where the main villain calls upon a Space Marine lackey to come take you out. Said Space Marine then slowly lugs himself through the door and lazily fires his bolter at you as you effortlessly trivialize him by slightly strafing. Recall that in the lore, these guys move so fast that a regular human literally cannot process their attacks. And I get that we can't emulate the 500 APM Space Marine in a PS2 game, sure, but remember that a single chapter of Space Marines is only 1,000 guys max, so if Fire Warrior killing one, that should be a big pivotal moment. And if this was the only Space Marine you kill, you might think, okay, rare encounter done poorly, sure, mini-boss, whatever. But then you kill another one, and another, and I don't know, maybe 50 more? And then Chaos Space Marines start showing up and you destroy all of them too. Remember that this is 40k's, and this is a Space Marine. And you know what? If fighting these guys was actually super fun, then I feel as if we could look past a lot of this nerd power scaling bullshit. To be fair, Games Workshop themselves is known to tweak the power level of whoever is the protagonist of a story. I mean, look at Bolt Gun, where Malam Kato is insanely overpowered. Like, to a degree, that's ridiculous, but it's actually fun, and this isn't. It also helps that Bolt Gun is leaning into its camp.
Who will prevail against the darkness? The Ultramarines!
While Fire Warrior takes itself very seriously.
Hey, Avenge the captain! Reinforcements are on the way.
I will say that the Chaos Space Marines at least attempt to add some variety, but Fire Warrior doesn't really nail this either. For example, the Chaos Space Marines are more dynamic because they come out of these portals and spawning doors, but frequently this feels janky and obnoxious to play against. There's also the Chaos Terminators, which serve as an even more lethal elite Space Marine, and they just take more bullets, and they seem to be significantly worse at hitting you too. And then there are the Chaos Raptors. Yeah, no, not those Raptors. I'm not entirely sure why they used an obscure successor chapter of Loyalists that shared the same name with a specific Chaos unit that they also included, but Chaos Raptors. I gotta talk about the Chaos Raptors. Can we talk about the Chaos Raptors? I want you to imagine the most jacked dude you've ever known. Now, double his mass, wrap him in a tank's worth of power armor, and for some reason, he's become deeply, spiritually obsessed with becoming a bird. So he straps on a jetpack and hurls himself at people feet first with his massive talons. Now remember from high school biology, the birds of prey scare their food by screaming at them to freeze them in fear. So this dude bolts a speaker onto himself, the likes of which you'd find rattling in the trunk of a pimped out Honda Civic, so he can scream at people really, really well. This is what he looks like. What do you think that sounds like? The sound that freezes you in terror so this 8-foot armored birdman can rip you apart limb from limb. What you have in mind is probably much better than what the Fire Warrior devs used. And this is where the real problem starts to become apparent. It's not just that the enemies are mechanically boring, it's that nothing in this game has the impact, fear, or absurdity that it should. This is Warhammer. It's obvious that hulking demonic birdmen and demon princes should be scary and formidable, but the Imperium too should elicit something in the player. The Imperium of Man lobotomizes its people to turn them into automatons. They sacrifice thousands of space wizards daily so their souls can empower their comatose god emperor. Their soldiers eat corpse starch for rations. Corpse starch. Corpse starch. As a Tau, an outsider looking in at humanity for the first time, the Imperium should make you deeply, viscerally uncomfortable. But none of that is here. Not in the gameplay, not in the narrative, and not really in the level design either, which is mostly brown corridors leading to gray rooms leading to more brown corridors. My only moments of excitement were the occasional piece of art ripped from the old tabletop codexes slapped on a wall. There is one standout, which is this Chaos Fortress near the end that actually has some really cool stuff in it and genuinely feels like 40k, but it's literally the last f***ing full level in the game. So I hope you enjoy your riveted industrial metal rooms, because you're gonna see a lot of them. The game just lacks any sense of scale, weirdness, or really anything that makes you feel like you're actually standing inside the 41st millennium. And the levels mechanically are just as empty. Fire Warrior didn't really know what type of shooter it wanted to be. On one hand, it was trying to do a Halo, but we're collecting keys like 1993's Doom. But it lacks the density of the labyrinths and halls of Mars, so grabbing keys feels incredibly unceremonious and like a waste of time in this game. And then there's the story, which on paper sounds fine. Kais gets captured, the Imperium and Tower at each other's throats, and you're fighting your way through Imperial forces to rescue your leader. Standard stuff. But then somewhere around the halfway point, the twist happens. After fighting the Imperium for about half the game, oh no, it was actually Chaos all along. A traitor in the Imperium's ranks was pulling the strings the whole time, and that's why they took your leader. And now you have to team up with the Ultramarines to save him and protect their honor and... Wait, hold on. This is an Imperium story. They just shoved a Fire Warrior into it. The entire narrative, the betrayal, the chaos corruption, the noble alliance to defeat the real threat, that's a Space Marine plot. And I feel like because we're in a Space Marine story, we lose focus on what makes the Tau cool. Because the biggest selling point of the Tau on the tabletop, the thing that makes people buy the little plastic men, is not Fire Warriors. It's the mechs. Crisis suits, broadsides, riptides, the Gundam fantasy. That is the entire aesthetic identity of the faction. That is why people play Tau, and none of that is in this game. It would be like if in Space Marine, you never actually wore power armor. You were just a Space Marine scout. Fire Warrior was an entire game built to introduce and sell you on a brand new faction, and they left out the thing that said faction is actually known for: What you're left with is a game that makes chaos look ridiculous, turns the Imperium into bland generic space soldiers, and gives the Tau so little characterization or sauce they barely feel like anything at all. It feels like a damn hit job against the Tau. And people put up with mediocre Warhammer games all the time, because even if the mechanics and gameplay are so-so, the world building can be really good, and it brings to life the things that fans have only read in a book or simulated on a tabletop. A Warhammer 10 out of 10 game is usually a 7 out of 10 game that does the Warhammer flavor right. But if your game is bad and your 40k is bad, then your game is just bad. I know some of this sounds like a superfan's complaints, but if they had leaned into any of the stuff that makes the Tau cool, we might be having a completely different conversation right now. So, who actually made this game? Who was responsible for all of this? Well, there used to be a publisher/developer called THQ. They were the only company Games Workshop allowed to touch their IP for a long time. And within THQ, you had studios like Relic, who made the Dawn of War series, one of the most beloved Warhammer games of all time. But Fire Warrior didn't get Relic. Fire Warrior got Kujo Studios. Now, I don't want to say that Kujo only made bad games. They actually assisted on development on a lot of really great ones. But I will say that many of their titles are the kind of games you can still find lining the shelves of your local Goodwill to this day. Zumba Fitness, Disney Sing It, Dancing with the Stars, the game. Kujo was a studio with the philosophy of hire us and we will make literally anything for you. No, seriously, anything. And the thing is, before Fire Warrior and after Fire Warrior, they never made another first-person shooter. This was their one and only FPS, and it shows. Kujo was never the studio to make a first-person Warhammer game. They were the studio to make Warhammer Imperium Sing-Along, but they got the Fire Warrior job instead. And I feel as if THQ inadvertently set back Warhammer games for a long time with this decision. They doomed Fire Warrior by handing it to a studio that had no business making this type of game. And when said game landed with a 47 on Metacritic, no meaningful sales traction, zero cultural impact, it sent a message to Games Workshop. Do what works for the IP and do not take more risks. And what worked was Space Marines and strategy games. Dawn of War was pulling great reviews and player numbers. Why risk another game on a faction nobody asked for? Why risk an FPS when RTS games are printing money? So they didn't. Now, I will say in general, there's always been a bit of a chicken or egg scenario happening in Warhammer. Space Marines get the most media because they sell the most models, but they sell the most models because they get the most media. It's a loop. So what happens if a less popular army like the Tau gets a game that people actually enjoy? Well, I'd assume it'd sell more models, obviously. But Games Workshop looks at the numbers and says, well, the Tau models don't sell, so why would we invest in more Tau media? And then Tau don't sell because they have no media, and they have no media because they don't sell. You can see the problem. People buy what they see. I mean, I guarantee you that Ultramarines and Tyranids saw a massive sales bump because of Space Marine 2. Now, after Fire Warrior, it would be another decade plus before new studios would get the green light to make Warhammer 40,000 shooters. And I'd say we actually have some good ones now. Darktide and Boltgun are both great entries in their respective subgenres. The FPS drought is finally breaking, but the Tau are nowhere near it. And it's not just the shooters. I mean, look at what's coming out right now. Dawn of War 4, no Tau. Total War Warhammer 40,000, no Tau. Two of the biggest Warhammer 40,000 games in years, and the Tau didn't make the cut for either. Now, I will admit that there's only a handful of Xenos-focused Warhammer games at all, and most of them are Mimi Orc titles that are either mobile game slop or budget indie projects. And for the Tau specifically, they've been reduced to expansion packs, DLC add-ons, and a total absence from launch rosters for over 2 decades. Fire Warrior was their shot to break into the loop, get a good game, sell more models, justify more media, sell some more models, but the game bombed. And you know what? What might be one of the biggest tragedies in all of this is that 40k's is actually sort of cool. His story had some real potential, and I know that because this game got a novelization, and I actually read it. And the book isn't incredible, but it at least attempts what I would have loved to see in the game. The horrors of the Imperium on full display, tech priests, servitors, the bureaucratic madness of the machine that is humanity's empire. And on the other side, the philosophy of the Tau, their technology, their greater good, the way their rational optimism crashes when it meets the horror of the galaxy. The book actually tries to put these two civilizations side by side and ask what happens when they collide and how 40k's personally deals with it. Fire Warrior the game doesn't give a about any of this. It just hands you a pulse rifle, points you down the next brown corridor, and says, "Good luck, champ." Now imagine for a second that Tau Fire Warrior gets a remake. Not a remaster, but a full remake, with even a fraction of Space Marine 2's budget. With a studio that actually knows how to build an FPS. A game where you're not just walking down corridors, pressing M1, you're fighting with your drones. Piloting a crisis suit through a war zone, getting a storm surge in position so it can tear a hole the size of a house into a Chaos Titan. And then you're seeing the Imperium not as the heroes, not as the player faction, but through the eyes of a species that genuinely can't comprehend how humanity ended up like this. This guy's got a toaster for a face. That game would sell 1 zillion copies, and in turn, I guarantee the Tau would see a surge in
Little Plastic Men sales.
because everyone would want Shazla Tau Kai's and the badass suits that he piloted. But instead, in 2003, a studio that made Zumba games was handed the keys to introduce the Tau to the gaming world. And what they delivered was so forgettable, so mechanically broken, so completely devoid of everything that makes the Tau worth caring about, that years later we're still waiting for someone to get it right. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I'm a Space Marine guy. I always have been. But I'm left to wonder if part of that is because 90% of the books ever written are about them. I mean, hell, the entire prequel of 40k is only about Space Marines. And don't get me wrong, their stories are incredible. I love them. But when I read The Infinite and the Divine, one of the only stories that focuses on the Necrons, that follows 2 eternally old man robots fighting over petty bullshit for centuries, I found myself thinking, damn, I'm a Necron fan now. The Tau needed Fire Warrior to make people feel like that. Kai's deserves it, the fans deserve it, a piece of media that just shows people how cool the Tau really can be. But what did they get? A sad imitation of Halo that ruined everything. Thanks for watching. Oh yeah, Kai's also kills a Lord of Change. Yeah, the Demon Prince saying, no, he kills a Lord of Change. They needed like 1 million guys to do that in Space Marine 2, but I guess bro just built diff.